Hello, 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 fellow travelers. Welcome to the Pheladi Presents South Africa podcast, which is a podcast that follows my tour of South Africa as a local. In today's first episode of the podcast, I'll be doing some introductions. I'll be introducing myself and the podcast. Therefore, I'll be introducing who I am, what the podcast is about, and why I have decided to do this project that is the podcast. So, my name is Pheladi Pasha. I am a South African young woman. I am Pedi, and I'm a traveler. I consider myself a traveler. I love to travel and I want to share my travels. I I have really grown up in many different parts of the country, so I've seen a lot, I've engaged with a lot, I've met different people, and I want to share that information. I want to document that information, that knowledge, and share it with you guys. And yeah, to give a brief bio of where does this love of travel, this interest in seeing different things, engaging with different things come from. Well, my parents tell me that I was born in Mthatha, which is in the Eastern Cape province of the country. And then from there, we moved to Limpopo, which is where my dad comes from. I'm not gonna go into the history of how he met my mom and why he went to the Eastern Cape. That's a very long story. But yeah, from the Eastern Cape, we went to Limpopo, Guyani, and then I lived there for a couple of years. From Guyani, we moved to Pretoria, and I did crèche, primary school there. Grew up there, basically lived out a significant part of my childhood in Pretoria in Gauteng, which is, you could say, the central province of the country. And then from Pretoria, I went back to Limpopo, this time by myself without my parents. I went to go live with some relatives so that I can do high school in Limpopo. The first 2 years of high school, I did grade 8 and 9 there. And then from Limpopo, I went to the Northwest. This time I went to boarding school in the Northwest and did the last 3 years of high school there. And then from the Northwest, I went to Gauteng, did my graduate degree at Wits University in Johannesburg. And then from Johannesburg, I moved to Cape Town and did my postgraduate studies, did my master's degree at the University of Cape Town. And so I've really seen South Africa, I've seen a lot. And out of that story, right, those travels, those different contexts that I've found myself in, I grew a love of travel. And most importantly, I grew a love of my home country. And so I've gained a lot of knowledge about the travel and tourism in our country. And I just want to share that. Uh, Not that there isn't South African information, tourism information, there is, but I just want to add to it because there's some things that I've since learned out of my travels that I haven't um, seen anywhere else besides in my own experience. And I want to document my experiences as information for others who are interested in traveling my home country, whether you are a fellow local South African or you're an international tourist who's interested in visiting South Africa. So that's me. And basically, that's where this podcast comes in. This podcast is about my tour of South Africa as a local, but particularly a cultural tour. of South Africa, because uh, that's an aspect of tourism information in the country that's missing, right? There's a lot of information about the nature, the natural environment of the country, and the popular spots, the popular destinations to go to, but not much about culture and heritage. And if there is information about culture and heritage, the resources that are communicated to the public are very limited. And I know a lot more than what I've read in the tourism information that's been provided about cultural resources or cultural sites, and I want to add to that to that knowledge. um I'm also on a personal journey. um I'm interested in learning more about ancient African heritage or ancient African civilizations. So, I'm a black woman who lives on the continent, who grew up on the continent. Yet, one thing I've observed is that the information, the history that that is documented about South Africa is a predominantly Western one. It's a very Eurocentric history. I know a lot about ancient Western civilizations and how they ended up here on the African country. I know about the Portuguese when they first discovered, and I say that sarcastically, because how can you discover a land that people were already living in? But I know a lot about the Portuguese when they discovered South Africa. And then from the Portuguese, I know about the Dutch when they came and made South Africa a halfway point as they were traveling from their parts of the world and finding a different route to Asia, and so that they could trade with Asia. And I know about when they settled here as a result of making South Africa a halfway point, they started settling. And from there on, we had colonization, which also came with the British, right? And then from that, apartheid, and then leading to uh, the democratic nation that we now are. So I know a lot about the Western angle of our history, but I'm interested in the African perspective of history, right? And not only the African perspective of the timeline that I've just recounted, but also one that goes further back before the 1400s, when the Portuguese first discovered South Africa. Uh, because, like I said, there were already people living on the land, and these people were not waiting for white people to come and civilize them. They already had their own systems, their own way of life. They were traveling, they were engaging with one another, trading with one another, trading with um nations in other parts of the world. And so I'm interested in that. I want to know more about what they did, what they innovated, what their values were. And that's the journey that I'm on. That's what I am going to significantly document in this podcast. Not that I'm not going to document anything else, I am, but that's the priority for me, because that's the journey that I'm on, to really learn about my ancient heritage as a South African black woman. And I want to share that with you guys, whoever's interested in that. um yeah, and not only learning about my own ancient African heritage, uh as a black woman, but I also want to learn about the cultures that call South Africa home, right? We are a country that is made up of 11 different languages. Um, all of them are official. And with that, that means that there are 11 official cultures in South Africa, 11 different groups of people. And even within that, it's much more complicated and diverse. It's not just as simple as, oh, it's 11 groups of people. Within each group, each culture, each language, there are all these complexities that are happening there, dialects and people who identify differently with that with their culture or with the language. So I want to learn about that. I really wanna understand, other people, and not that I've never engaged with other people from a different language or a different uh, culture as me. I mean, I can speak four language, even though not fluently. I can hear, right, some of them, but I never engaged with those people in a way that was about their culture, their history, um, their perspective on life, their way of life, their beliefs. It was more about an individual engagement about, you know, their character, their personality, and enjoying that more than it was about, let's delve deeper into where you come from and what you identify with. So that's the journey that I'm on. I want to learn about myself and I want to learn about my neighbors, especially if our goal as South Africans is to be a non racial country. I think part of the solution is that it's really getting out of our comfort zones, which are our own languages, our own cultures, our own race, and getting out there and being curious about others who are part of us, even though they look different from us. All right, so why I started this podcast, I wrote a manifesto because I feel like I've said a lot, about the podcast. I think a lot was mentioned there. I think I've summed it quite up in earlier on as I was talking about the podcast. But I just want to read out this manifesto that I wrote for the podcast and the objectives that I have for it, and hopefully that might help clarify further what I've said about what the podcast is about and why am I doing it. Um, so here it goes. I wrote, the mission is to provide South African travel information for culturally motivated tourists and promote an appreciation of African cultural heritage. Objectives I have set out for this podcast include to document South Africa's cultural heritage and deepen tourist knowledge of South African tourism. And by cultural heritage, I just don't mean the social values and beliefs or art. I also refer to the natural environment of South Africa because that is part of South Africa's identity. When you think of South Africa, some of you might think of Table Mountain or the Drakensberg, and those places. They even though they're famous because of their structures, because of they natural aesthetic, they do also they are archives of culture. History has happened in those places, so I'll also be delving into those parts and documenting those parts of the country. The second point is to communicate tourism information that includes an Afrocentric perspective and promote cultural diversity. Thirdly, it's to guide tourists through traveling the country and experiencing different South African cultures, and help reduce the anxiety generally involved in travel planning, because we all know what that's like, right? Uh, as much as we love to travel, we all dream and of traveling and work towards that or aspire to do that. Um, Travel planning can be a headache and can cause a lot of anxiety. And I'm hoping that through documenting my experiences and sharing that information, it can help ease that anxiety in your travel planning. There are other reasons why I have uh, started the podcast. It is not all just about you. And I want to be transparent about that. If somebody says that, oh, I'm just doing this because it's about other people in the community, well, I like to believe that that they um they are honest. And if they are, oh, I admire them. But we all are selfish, we all have our selfish reasons for doing things. And I just want to be transparent with you guys about why, what are my other reasons for doing this podcast. And they include that, you know, I would like to start a writing career within travel media, or lifestyle content, creating lifestyle content. uh, I'm a writer. I have a, a good skill of writing. And writing is something that has always been a part of me ever since I was a young kid, and it's something that I would like to make a living out of. And when I later on learned that, oh, I also love traveling, so the conversation in my head has been, okay, so how can I combine these two interests, and make a career out of that, make a living out of these two things that I enjoy. And so um, this podcast is a step towards that. I don't know how it's gonna take me there. So I'm hoping that it can really open up those doors for me, or that industry to me. I'm currently unemployed. That's another information about me. I've recently graduated from the University of Cape Town, and so I'm currently looking for work. And, you know, as much as this is also about getting work, it's also about passing time, and working towards something, even though there's nobody telling you what time to wake up, where to be at a certain time, and what to do during the day. um, just to be proactive. Another reason why I started this podcast is because I aspire to travel internationally as well. So I'm hoping that this podcast could open up an international community of travelers, where we can have a conversation with one another about our home countries and our own cultures, our own local religions and beliefs. And yeah, so that we can share information about one another, right? And use that information to go travel to another country. As much as I want to use this podcast to help other people uh, travel my home country, I'm hoping that I could find people who want to talk to me about their home countries, and encourage me to come and see um what is interesting about their own um own home countries and the local cultures that exist there. So I'm hoping that I could one day start a Facebook group where members can share, uh, not only ask for advice about traveling to South Africa or any other part of the world, but because I'm hoping that there will be an international community in that group. But I'm also hoping it's a platform that, they can also share about them, and we can start a conversation, right? A global conversation that can really make this world much more interesting. I hope. So I mentioned that in reading out this manifesto, I mentioned that it's the information is geared towards culturally motivated tourists, and I just want to elaborate on that a bit. Um, why am I creating information for specifically culturally motivated tourists, and what do I mean by culturally motivated tourists, or in other terms, cultural tourists, yeah, so I just want to elaborate on that. I think I have mentioned, I've given great detail on that earlier on in the podcast, but yeah, I I want to what's the word, I am directing this information firstly to cultural tourists because, hey, first of all, I'm a cultural tourist. I consider myself a cultural tourist. As an art graduate, that's the type of tourism that I am interested in. And when I plan to travel, or when I think of traveling to a destination, my reasons for traveling are usually cultural. I'm thinking about the art that I'll be consuming, about the culture that I'll be consuming, and the history that I'll be consuming. So first and foremost, I'm a cultural tourist, and therefore that's what I know best, um, and because that's how I travel as a traveler. And what do I mean by a cultural tourist? I have a quote here that I ripped off from the internet from a website called mytravelresearch.com. And it reads: culture and heritage tourists usually visit cultural heritage attractions such as historic buildings and other historic attractions, archaeological sites, state, local, or national parks, art galleries or museums, concerts, plays or musicals, ethnic or ecological heritage sites, and such like attractions. These travelers say these trips are more memorable than conventional holiday trips since they allow them to learn something new. So that's what I mean by a cultural tourist, and that describes me to a T. That has described my travel in the past to a T. But even though this information will be geared towards cultural tourists, um, there are also other themes and topics that are also addressed within the podcast because despite what kind of traveler you are, whether you are an adventure junkie or you love the soft life and you love luxury, I don't know what they call them, luxury travelers, I think, or you are a honeymooner, or you are a safari tourist, however you consider yourself as a tourist, there's some things that affect us all as tourists. There's something that, none of us are exempt from. If you want to travel somewhere, there's certain things that we all have to consider. So I will be touching on other things that are related to traveling and traveling within South Africa. For example, I will touch on the social, the economic, and the political climate of the country. Uh, because when you travel, you have to consider those things. You have to consider um, what are the politics of the country. You have to consider what is happening in terms of the country's currency, right? Or just the economy. For example, right now we're going through an inflation, right, as an economy because of what's happening in Ukraine, and also COVID was another thing that really brought us or brought our economy to its knees. So such things you have to consider. And in the terms of social aspects, for example, we have gender-based violence happening in the country, and that's a thing that women need to consider, especially women who want to travel by themselves. And so how can we protect ourselves amidst this thing that is another big issue in the country? Literally, it feels like there's a war on women's bodies in this country, but I'm not gonna get into that now. I don't want to start scaring people off. So, we'll talk about that as the conversation of this podcast continues. So, yeah, I think I have touched on uh, a number of things. Why I think I've addressed a lot about what this podcast is about, or what it's gonna be, what it's going to look like. Let me just make certain. Um, yeah, I think I'm gonna end it there. I honestly think that I am gonna end it there. Uh, So, if you consider yourself a cultural tourist, or you're just interested in knowing more about tourism activities that you can do um, in the country or in South Africa, regardless of whether you're a local or whether you are an international tourist, please tune in every Friday. I am committing to this thing. I am committing to this thing. So I'm gonna I am I am crossing my fingers that I'm gonna be able to post an episode each and every Friday from now until the 23rd of December, because a girl also needs a holiday. So the podcast will be going on a production break then on from the 23rd of December, so that I can also celebrate some Christmas and New Year's, and also reflect on how the podcast is doing and where I want to take it um in the next season of the podcast. Um, yeah, but right now the plan is to commit to posting an episode every Friday. Until then, if I sound like I am doubting myself, that's because woo, getting to record this first episode has been, I've jumped through hoops and hurdles to get to this point. Life, it's as if, why does it seem as if when you have a plan, when you have a goal, and you want to execute on it, life is just like, I am gonna throw everything that I can throw at this person to derail them. And that has been my experience in trying to record this first episode. It was supposed to be published much more sooner, but yeah, life was a pain. Life really was hell-bent on seeing me not achieve my goals, but here we are. We are recording. We have reached the end of the first episode, and I am so excited. I am looking forward to more, and most importantly, I'm looking forward to seeing what conversations will come out of this podcast. Um, until next week, keep good, make good choices, and I'll see you next week Friday. Thank you for listening. Bye.